Well, if you're keeping track, I knew both hymns tonight. Look at that. Moving on up in the world. We are in chapter 11. We finally have made it. I doubt we're going to make it all the way through 11 tonight, but you never know. And on the back of your handout, if you grabbed one last week or this week, I made you a chart. It could be very handy. You might want to rip it off and kind of keep it handy as we read. It'll keep some things in order. If not, totally fine. Just kind of trying to give you a little heads up. Gotta get all my papers in order. So when we are, just to kind of catch us up, I know we all sleep every week. So we are, of course, in chapter 11. We're in the last kind of vision, the dream of Daniel. And so in this, you kind of putting this all the way through. This is the kind of the very end. And so we finished with chapter 10, which was the beginning part of the dream. It's going to have kind of multiple stages, and we're kind of moving into chapter 11, which is going to turn our eyes, kind of change things a little bit. Remember, because this will become very apparent tonight, we'll be kind of going back and forth. I've said when you read Daniel, it's like transition lenses, right? Some things that you're reading happens right then in Daniel's time. Some of the things are kind of in the mid-range. They're far off, but they're not drastically far off. And then some are at the very top that are really far away. And so tonight we're going to be, especially chapter 11 and even chapter 12, we're going to keep going back and forth from things that are happening right there in Daniel's time to things that are happening a couple hundred years in the future, which was prophetic. And then we're going to be looking at things far future, second coming, tribulation kind of things, kind of in that top lens. So I'll try to kind of give you kind of the breaks of that, because sometimes when you get into prophecy, Revelation, Daniel, Ezekiel, all of them have it, like they're smarter than we are, right? Because we read in English like it's fluid statements in a fluid paragraph, where they're jumping back and forth, and sometimes we read it and you're kind of like, okay, where is this at? When's this happening? So I'll try to give you those breaks as we read. But so we're in this last kind of vision of Daniel. This is a vision from God. Of course, the angels are explaining it. Just if you remember last week, he's meeting with this angel. I say it's an angel. So others say it's Jesus, but I'm going to call him an angel. And so he's there. Do you remember he was laying flat? They touched him. He could stand up. He was mute. They touched him. He could talk. So these angels were giving him power, but they were also referring and telling him about this kind of spiritual warfare, right? He kind of gave us a vision where these angels are in another realm constantly fighting and moving for God's will to happen, right? Much like, without getting too much into it, but what we talked about this morning, right? Why does God allow bad things to happen? Why does the history look like its way? Because God is always moving and sustaining and creating, and so in that, there has to be a part that God's kind of providence comes through, and so the angels are in that. So the angels are coming and going, and they're kind of explaining the situation of what's happening right then in Daniel. And now in 11, we're going to kind of get the prophecy. And when you're reading chapter 11, if you don't have, my notes, or you don't have somebody else's notes and timelines, you read it and you're kind of like, okay. And so you kind of read it, and it's kind of hard to understand without all the extra notes, because when you go from 10 to 11, we go from kind of the bottom lens to the mid lens. But when you read it as an American, as an English person, right, it's sometimes we miss that. And so my notes are coming along, and what I've done is I've gone up the timeline, and so I've gone in the future of when Daniel's writing, and I'm going to give you a whole lot of names and a whole lot of dates that are proving what the angel has said. Now, the things that I'm telling you about the names and the dates, this is not what is in the prophecies. Daniel is not hearing these names. He's not seeing these names. He's not hearing about these kings and this war, and he's not connecting it to Rome and Syria. I'm just going to kind of give you the future. And so my hope is that when we read this, it might seem a little difficult. That's why that chart is there. It'll make it a little easier for you. But what I'm doing is I'm proving what the angel told Daniel. Remember, Daniel is in the 600 BC range. And so chapter 11 starts, and it's going to jump to things that are happening in the 300s and the 200s, and even if we make it to the end, even in the 100 BC range. So we're getting prophecy of 400, 500, 600 years ahead. And in my notes, when we talk about all these kings and kingdoms and places, I'm just kind of giving you a history lesson of proving what the angel, his message is true, what God is telling. So you're going to hear a lot of names tonight, and if you forget them, it's okay. Believe me, it's okay. But I wanted to give you the information to help prove chapter 11, and then we'll move the end 11, it goes to the far future, and 12 also it goes to the far future. So we are in we're in chapter 11. We actually looked at verse 1 last week, but we'll kind of start there again. It says, "As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him." Remember, this is the angel talking, right? This is the angel. If you remember chapter 10, the angel is talking to him, and now the angel is continuing to talk. So this is not Daniel talking, this is the angel, and the angel is saying, "And as for me, as for the angel, the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him." Now, if you remember the past chapters, Darius the Mede was the first king of Persia, right? He's the guy that took it over from Belshazzar, right? Nebuchadnezzar died. There was a couple other kings. Belshazzar, the handwriting on the wall. You remember that event, chapter 5. That night, Belshazzar gets killed, and then Persia takes over Babylon. Well, that is the king, Darius the Mede. That's that king. So here, the angel who is before this, right? Now he's kind of giving a little kind of prelude, right? He's saying, "Oh, you remember when Persia took over? I was there. The angel was there, and I was there to confirm and to strengthen him." And this is very interesting. Once again, goes along with what we're talking this morning, that the angel is indicating that this Persian king, Darius, this Persian country that took over Babylon, came through with angelic assistance, right? So you have a lost country, Babylon, gets invaded and took over by a lost country, Persia, and this happened because the angels were there to assist it and make it happen. And so it's just interesting, right? Because I think a lot of us, we get this idea that angels, they only help Christians, they only love Christians. God's providence is throughout all of time and all of people, saved or lost, right? It happens. We see this. We see this. You think of the Old Testament. You can go back to Cain and Abel, right? You can Esau. You can go back to the Pharaoh, right? God hardened Pharaoh's heart. He was lost. God hardened it to make God's plan go through to allow Israel to be released, which is starting the covenant, right? So it's going to be starting out. We're going to be looking at that in a couple weeks on Sunday mornings. But you kind of have this idea. So it's interesting to remember the angel's still talking, and because of the angel's assistance, Persia takes over. Now verse 2. "And now I will show you the truth." Now the angel's going to expound on what has already been said. So he's already kind of said, here's what's going to happen. We've seen the Babylonian statue that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of, right? We've seen the 4 beasts come out of the sea. We've seen the he-goat and the ram, which were even more kind of specifications of 2 of the 4 beasts, right? So we've had all these kind of visions and revelations that God has already given us to tell us about the future. But here in verse 11, he says, now I'm here to tell you the truth. It's not that the angel's been lying. It's not that God hasn't been lying. But now I'm here to give you the evidence. I'm to give you more of the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a fourth shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has come strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Now, we've kind of talked about a couple of these kings, but the angel is saying, okay, you have Persia at the beginning, Darius the Mede, right? There's going to be 4 in total kings that rule this Persian government before Greece takes over, before the third beast comes out of the sea. And so not only do we kind of get a prophecy of there's going to be more kings, but we get more specifics, kind of what it is, right? So there's going to be 3. There was Cyrus, Cambyses, and Darius. And so Darius is the one that's in the book of Esther. Kind of he closes it, he ends it. So you kind of have Darius at the beginning and Darius at the end. 2 different people. And they have multiple names. It's really funny, kings, Caesars. They have multiple names. So you get into Esther, you're not going to read Darius, you're going to read Xerxes. But it's the same guy, right? Multiple names. Most of them were just position titles, not his Sean, right? It would have been his position title. So in this, right, so he has, they're going to have 3, but the 4th shall be richer than them all. This is talking about this Xerxes, right? From Esther to Ezra, we see this. His wealth and power started in the first campaign against Greece. So he starts, and then Alexander the Great is getting ready to go, right? So he kind of finishes the second beast, and now the third beast is rising with Alexander the Great in Greece, moving up. You see in Esther 1, the famous feast. And I give you there 9 verses, and it talks all about it. And what's interesting is if you were to read those 9 verses, and we're not, I'm going to try to get us through this, but it talks a lot about the same things, right? We see the citadel in Susa. We see a lot of the same places. We hear a lot of the same things. And so, I encourage you, and I haven't really planned what we're going to do after Daniel, but if you moved right from here and you just read through Esther, it'd be a nice little transition. Some things and names would keep familiar in your brain. But we see that he's having this. It's a very grand feast. For 7 days, basically, he sends an edict out to the kingdom and says, everybody can eat and drink as much as they want, and it's on me, right? So the ultimate buffet, it talks about the linens, the gold, the purple tapestries. And so basically, it's pointing out that this king, Xerxes, is rich. He's famous. And so here, remember, this hasn't happened yet. And it's so hard because in our brains, okay, we know about it. But for Daniel, he doesn't know Xerxes. He doesn't know what's going to happen. The angel says the last one is going to be the biggest, the best. And so you can imagine when this is here, King Xerxes throws this party that is really the party of all parties. Nobody's ever thrown a party like this before. You have to believe that people who know this, have heard Daniel talk about this, are kind of like, this is the 4th king. He is rich. People are starting to kind of line up, kind of, okay, this is the 4th. He is rich. He is powerful. So this means Greece is coming, right? The next beast is coming. So after this 4th one, then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. This mighty king, of course, is Alexander the Great. This is the 3rd beast. This is kind of the thighs area of the statue we see in Daniel chapter 2, the kind of all kind of silver. And so we see this mighty king shall arise, who will rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, but according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others beside these. And we've already talked about these in kind of the beast and things, but remember, Alexander the Great, he comes up, he literally conquers the world with a very small army, moving very fast, a very young man, and then he's done, right? He gets killed. And so after that, what happens? And we talked about how the Senate of Greece took years. It literally took 20-something years to figure out who was going to be. During those times, Alexander the Great had 4 generals. Those 4 generals kind of took over, right? They were the next in charge, and so they kind of took over. And so instead of taking over one piece, they were smart, right? They kind of just went their ways. And so over these 20 years, these 4 generals that worked under Alexander the Great kind of went in the 4 corners. They went 4 different directions, and they started taking over. And so eventually the Senate comes to it, and they say, well, we're never going to be controlled by anyway, so the generals can have it, right? So now Greece was under one guy, now it's under 4. And we talked about those. They're Ptolemy, Seleucus, Philip, and Antagonius. And so we have those 4 generals, and that's exactly what it's saying. His kingdom is going to be spent to the 4 winds, but not to his posterity. It's not going to his kids. He didn't have kids, right? He was a young guy. And so it didn't move down the family tree. It went to the generals. And now we see in verse 5, then the king of the south shall be strong. All right, so you can see on your last page, you have a chart. Whether you want to follow it or not, that's fine. But I try to put these in order because they all got the first name. They all got the same first name. And so as you read, it does get a little bit confusing. But you can see kings of the south, in your mind, think Egypt, right? Think Africa, North Africa. That's kind of the area. Even moving all the way up into Palestine, Israel area. So in your mind, if you can get a map of what that would look like. So Israel kind of down that little sliver, touching Africa, and then the north part of Africa. So when we're talking about the kings of the south, that's the area we're talking about. And you'll notice on your chart, all the kings of the south are named Ptolemy, right? They just have different qualifiers after that, right? So, and then you have kings of the north. So when you think of the north, think past Israel, right? Israel's that little sliver of land. Think past that. Today, Syria, which if you're looking at a map, you have, if the podium is Israel, this little bitty sliver, Syria is to the northeast corner, kind of this area. Back in these days, Syria had taken over, and it's really kind of middle Israel all the way up, kind of this huge kind of structure. Today, we would call it Russia, South Soviet Union, kind of in there, in that area, right? So it goes up kind of high. So everything from now on, you just kind of use Israel as the middle. North of that is going to be Seleucus. So all the kings are named that. South of that, so Palestine, Israel area, down to Africa is going to be South Egypt. It's going to be the Ptolemies. And so here it kind of gave you the verses and the times and the dates. Most of these you don't need to know. Once again, I'm just proving what the angel is saying, because we're about to go through a lot of people killing a lot of people, and even Daniel hearing this, it would be hard to try. You'd have to imagine, right? So I just wanted to kind of explain that to you, and we'll kind of jump back and forth with these names. Then the king of the south, so that's Ptolemy the first, Soter, right? It's the first of the chart. The king of the south shall be strong. So where did he come from? If you remember the 4 generals, one of them was Ptolemy. And so Ptolemy went south, right? And one of them was Seleucus. He went north. And then you have Philip and you have Antagonists, right? They go east and west. And so they become nothing, really. They kind of get absorbed by the north and the south. So all this has happened. So this king of the south, this general from Alexander the Great's army, went south, North Africa area, and he shall be strong. But one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. So all of a sudden, we see that one of his princes, now, it's the word commander, right? So in our mind, we think prince, which would be a son, but really one of his commanders. Every good king's got good generals, right? Good commanders. So he goes to the south, which is a great general. It's a general for Alexander the Great, but one of his generals is going to be better than him. okay? Now remember, all this hasn't happened. This is all prophetic as Daniel is hearing it. Um, so the king of the south, one of his princes, is going to be stronger than him. Verse 6, and after some years, they shall make an alliance. And the daughter of the king of the south, so daughter of North Africa, Ptolemy, right, shall come to the king of the north, Seleucus, to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up in her attendants, he who followed her and he who supported her in those times. So what is all this talking about, right? So the daughter of the king of the south, her name is Bernice, which is funny, right? It's like, it seems like, like a normal American name. Bernice, it's Bernice, right? So it's Bernice, and this is the granddaughter of Soter. It's the granddaughter of the general from Alexander the Great. So, there's a year in there, a kind of a generation. And the plan was her to marry Antigus, which is the granddaughter of Nicator, and they married for a short time and got divorced. So the king of the south, the king of Egypt, he was like, okay, right? So everybody's plan is world domination, right? Nebuchadnezzar did it, Belshazzar did it, the Persians did it, Greece, Alexander the Great did it. So now the generals are like, well, okay, we're going to do it. World domination. You guys ever played the game Risk? Remember like the game that lasts 100 years? It's it, right? The theme is world domination. And so they're taking, and so in that, it's not just battles, just like when we go to war, it's not just blowing up people, but there's a lot of politicians in the background, right? There's a lot of treaties and a lot of signatures and a lot of favors and quid pro quo. You have like all these things going on in a war. The same is true then. So the king of the south, Egypt, says, okay, well, I want world domination. I want to take up past Israel, and I want to move north. So how can I do this? Well, one of the ways is, I'm just going to use my family. And so I'm going to send my daughter, Bernice, as a peace offering, right? And so I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to give you my daughter, and you kind of have to remember, right, world domination. So I'm going to give you the daughter, you're going to marry, you're going to have kids, so when you die, now my family has claim to the north as well as the south. If you know anything, I'm from Kentucky, right? So, it's like history to us. But if you know anything about, kind of like the Hatfield and McCoys, or even in the Civil War area, this happened a lot, all right? There was a lot of daughters given to get land. And so sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And here in this case, we can see the angel says it's not going to work, right? So the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north, make an agreement, but she will not retain the strength of her arm. She goes up there, and guess what? She doesn't like him. Could you imagine you're being forced to marry somebody? She doesn't like him, or he doesn't like her, or whatever. They get a divorce. And so this kind of messes up the plan, right? So now you sent your daughter up there, and she gets divorced and probably mad. Now she comes home crying to daddy. Now south hates north even more, right? So now it's only kind of getting worse. Verse 7, and from a branch from her roots, talking about Bernice, one shall arise in his place. And so Bernice's brother, Ptolemy Agurtus, this was the second or the third one on your list, right? It's kind of weird. So he's going to take over, right? So it's going to come, they're going to have a kid. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with him and shall prevail. So he's mad, right? He goes, she sends a daughter up there. She's up there for some time. She gets divorced. It's not like divorce court here where they settle in a court. And you would imagine it's going to be bad for the woman, right? It's going to be bad for the woman. She's going to get abused. It's going to be horrible. And so she comes home. What happens? Uncle is going to, I'm saving the day, right? So he gets an army, he rides up north, enters Syria, then he goes in, and we see that he's going to be victorious. He's going to come out on top. And he shall also carry off to the Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, and for some years shall refrain from attacking the king of the north, right? So not only does he go up and destroy and really kind of take over the king in Syria of the north, but now he invades their holy of holies, right? Their temples, their their acropolises, all their things. And so he grabs everything that is sacred to them and brings it back to Egypt. And it was so big and such a big win that we see that Egypt just kind of settles down. They come home and they're victorious, and they don't keep fighting to press them either more north or destroy them. They just kind of revel in the fact that they won, right? So it happens, they revel, hey, we won, we done this, we stole everything from them. And in verse 9, and then the latter shall come into realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So the latter shall come into the realm. So what happens? You sit there long enough, there's going to be retaliation, right? So now the north comes down and is fighting Egypt, right? In the south. Let's see, verse 10, his sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, but shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. So they come, they bring enormous forces, they charge the south to wipe out the Egyptians. However, they were killed and everything happens, but as we're reading this, right, I told you to think of the map, right? You have North Africa, you have that little sliver of land that leads into the kind of Israel, Palestine area, and then you have Syria way at the top. Every time it says that they go to the south, very few battles of all world history happen in Egypt. Okay, very, very few. You can count them on one hand. People were smart. The Egyptians were smart. They were the chief horse traders. They were mobile. They could move fast. And so what happens, you move 30, 40,000 people down, you got to send scouts. The king's going to learn. So the south would always come up. And so you'll see as we start reading that even though the north comes to the south, the battle was never in North Africa. It was always South Israel. It was always in the Palestine region. They would come up and have battle, right? You don't want to have a war on American soil, right? You want to have it somewhere else so our houses don't get destroyed. That's what Egypt was thinking. That's what the South was thinking. So every time these wars happen, whether south goes north or north comes south, the people in the middle are the ones getting destroyed. So out of this, think what's in the middle, right? Palestine, Israel region. So Israel is always a war zone. Okay, sound familiar? Because it is today, right? It is. And so, I can remember the day before I went last year, right? The day before I went, 6 missiles fired into like a town square. And then the next day I'm like landing right into town, and I'm like, baby, I'm not going to die, And so that was, but that's scary. But it's in the middle of a war zone. The same thing that's happening now, right? So this is happening, south and north, right? You got this. So we find out about this Antiochus the Great, right, in verse 11. So in this war that is raging, we see Antiochus the Great is one of these kings, and now he's moving, right? He's pushing north, and so in this, he's taking over Phoenicia, he's taking over Palestine. He's literally going north, but instead of going straight to Palestine, he's widening his forces. He's kind of going to the Mediterranean Sea and east of Israel, and they're kind of moving up and just kind of wiping out. This is Antiochus the Great. Verse 11, then the king of the south, which is Ptolemy, right, one of the Ptolemies, the fourth, moved with rage and shall come out and fight against the king of the north. This is this Antiochus Great, right? So you have these two kings, right? They come out, and he shall raise a great multitude, and it shall be given into his hand. So even though, I know these are so hard, even though Antiochus the Great he's defeated the Phoenicians, he's defeated the Palestinians, right? He's moving, this smaller army is moving up, and now they're going to take it over. Even though this is the bigger army, Antiochus the Great is the bigger, here the angel says that the bigger army's coming down, they're wiping everybody out, but the king of the south is going to win. The king of the south is going to be handed over to him. He shall not prevail. Verse 13, for the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first. And after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south, And the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. So, right, the north is coming down, defeating the Phoenicia, which think of Phoenicia as Mediterranean Sea. They're kind of defeating the coastline, defeating the Palestinians. The south comes up, they defeat them, and now they're going back down, but kind of the rest of the people in the north, and even now some of the Jews, not all of the Jews, we would say it's the apostate Jews, right? So remember what has happened, right? So in this time frame, all the Jews got taken away from Israel. The temple has been destroyed, right? They've been taken to Babylon. They've been kept in Babylon. They've been kept there for generations. And now, when they get released, okay, which happens in the Persian government, so that happens, which didn't last long. Then in the Greece kind of government, they're free to go. But what happens? We see in many, many places in the Old Testament, anytime the Jews get taken prisoner, normally a very small percentage of the Jews come back to Israel. They come back to Jerusalem, right? You can imagine if China took over America today, right? They take all of us over to China, or they just make us the new China. And you live through that, your kids live through that, your grandkids live through that, now your great-grandkids. Will they fight to be America? Will they fight to be what America once was many years ago? Or will they just say, you know what? I kind of dig this Chinese thing. I love rice. It's my favorite thing, right? They've been brainwashed, right? They've given up. They haven't seen the temple. They haven't seen sacrifices. They haven't seen anything like that. So why, after 100 years, would they leave the New York City of the world, right? They leaving the biggest and best cities of the world to go back to a 100-year-old war zone to rebuild little houses made of rocks and little walls and to eat goats and, to have nothing, right? They want the skyscrapers. They want the Mercedes. They want the Wi-Fi. They want the good stuff. And so here, when it says that the Jews, and we're going to talk about this a lot, the Jews are helping, it's called the apostate Jews. It's the Jews that were taken away in captivity, but did not return to the Jewish lifestyle, right? They did not return to Jerusalem and Israel. Some of them went back to the Jewish lifestyle, but stayed there. But many of them gave up the faith, right? They gave up the Jewish religion. They gave up this whole idea of God and the temple and sacrifices. And so every time tonight when we talk about the Jews' help, it's those Jews. It's the Jews who kind of gave up on God, right? So when we're reading this and we see that the king of the north shall rise, he's coming, there shall come a great army by his sides. Many of those will rise up against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people, right? These apostate Jews are there, right? Because their home country is basically a battlefield of the north and the south. They kind of just meet there and just kind of just destroy it time and time and time again. And so it happens, right? So this big fight is happening. And notice it says, they shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision. You can read every commentary in the world, and the reality is nobody really knows what that means. There's a lot of good guesses, hey, this is what it means. But the angel doesn't tell us really what that vision is. We do know that this is the first time that we see that these apostate Jews are now entering in with Syria, and they're trying to destroy the south. They're trying to destroy the north kind of Africa, Egypt area. Now we're going to, we'll fast forward next week when we get into the Antichrist, right? And what happens is this guy, the Antichrist, Antioch Epiphanes, who we've already talked about, right? The little horn of the goat. What is he? He is Syrian, and he's leading revolts against what? The Jews. The people who live in the Jews, not the apostate Jews, the real Jews. And so here, when it says to fulfill the vision, the consensus is that somewhere in this vision was that this was the time that the Jews needed to kind of interact with the Syrians, kind of become friends, but not really friends. And if you go to Israel today, they're not friends. They are complete enemies. We went as close to the Syrian border as we could on my tour, and I got to see a lot of great artillery. I mean, they are enemies, and it is interesting, right? But then, at this point, they kind of almost teamed up, right? These apostate Jews teamed up. So we don't know what that vision is, but we know because of this, we'll later see Antiochus the Epiphanes, the Antichrist, come out, and now he has this kind of interaction with the Jews. And so, is that the vision? We don't know, but it kind of makes sense, right? So they're coming to do this, but look what happens. They're going to fail, right? So all these apostate Jews are joining up to rise against the king of the south. It's not going to work. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city. We know this to be Cedron, which is on the Mediterranean Sea. You can actually go and find kind of the rubble of the city there. And so basically what it's saying is they're moving south along the Mediterranean Sea, and they take it, but they're still really far away from Egypt, okay? They're really far away from Egypt, but they're kind of building momentum, right? So these apostate Jews and some of the Syrians come down, try to beat the south. It doesn't work out. So what happens? Now the north gets more mad. They get better. They kind of get together, get more soldiers, and now they're marching down and they take Cedron, this huge city. It's kind of like the Jericho of that modern time, right? It's a huge fortified city that nobody could really take. They took it. So it's a big win, right? Big morale boost. And the force of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, Israel, with destruction in his hands. He shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. Once again, right? Wars have these agreements, have these politics with them. So this agreement, what is it? It is Antiochus thought he might control Egypt, see if this sounds familiar, right? Politically, without having to go all the way south. So he's coming down, he's beating cities, he beats Cedron, which is a huge morale, showing how good his army really is. And so he says, you know what would be really great? Not to march, 90,000 troops, another month to the south in the middle of the desert, right? Let's not. So is there something that we can do? So Antiochus, what does he do? He offers his daughter to the king of the south, who was a 10-year-old boy. So I'm just saying, if you're a 10-year-old boy and somebody comes to you and says, I'll give you the cutest woman of my country, what does the 10-year-old boy do? Okay, all right, yeah, sounds good, let's do it. What do you want? All right, it happens, right? So he offered in hopes that he would, because she was older, he's 10, he says, this is a great idea. The king accepts the wife, and kind of puts her on one of her many plight concubines as a 10-year-old, right? He has this, and so you have kind of Antiochus thinking, okay, he's going to be able to control him, right? Every woman can control a man, but he's only 10, right? Women have special ways. You give a young man his hot wife, she's got ways, right? So we're going to do this. But what happens? She actually falls in love with this little kid, right? She falls in love with this king, and all of a sudden she starts listening to him, and she starts obeying him, and now all of a sudden she forgets about dad in the north, and she says, oh, baby, I love you. I love Egypt. I want to be the queen of Egypt, right? And so she switched sides on dad, which what happens? Would infuriate any dad, right? What are you doing? This is a part of the big plan overall. And so it doesn't work. She falls in love with him, and they kind of work things out, and they, whatever, a 10-year-old boy does with a girl. I don't know. That's really weird, but it is. And so they set this agreement. Afterwards, he shall turn his face to the coastlands, which is the Mediterranean Sea, and shall capture many of them. But a commander shall put an end to this insolence. So we see the commander, which is Lucius, which, if you love this kind of history, or if you love movies, this is the brother of the guy who defeated Hannibal, right? So if you've heard about the War of Hannibal, this is the brother, right? So it's a well-fighting family, right? So you kind of have this idea, right? So you kind of have the 300, right? It's kind of, that is what it is if you watch the movies. As soon as all happens, this commander is going to put an end to this. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him, and he shall turn his face back toward the fortress of his own land. So now he defeats this, and now he doesn't go south. His allegiance turns. And so now he's going back to Syria. He's going back to north to kill the king, right? So his allegiance kind of changes. And he goes, indeed, he shall turn his insolence back, and he shall turn his force to his own land. But he shall stumble and fail and shall not be found, right? So he doesn't make it all the way. And then shall arise in his place one who shall ascend an exactor, a tax collector of the tribute for the glory of the kingdom. What happens? Wars cost money, right? Look at our national debt, right? Wars cost money. And so what happens? You've had all these wars over kind of this 50, 60 years, and they never stop. They're continuous. So this new king goes down, the new king arrives, and now he says, look, we're about broke. What do we do? And so what does he do? He says, well, here's what we're going to do. Who has money? Oh, yeah, Israel. I remember Israel rebuilt, right? They built that temple. It's all gold. They have lots of stuff. So what does he do? He sends this tax collector to Israel that says, if you don't pay taxes to Egypt, we're going to kill all of you, right? And Israel is, if you've been there, they are a tax people. They still are today. Pay lots of taxes, right? And so he sends this to the tribute for the glory of the kingdom, which is Israel. But within a few days, this tax collector will be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. So what happens is this guy, he's going and something happens. We don't know what. We're going to say God. God intervenes. He doesn't go to Israel. He gets this plan, and now he goes back to kill the king, right? So you can see this happens multiple times. The king sends somebody, they send him back, right? They don't like it, they send him back. And so instead of finishing his ministry, he returned home and to assassinate Seleucus. Okay, so the next one is 21 is where we're getting into the Antichrist. And so we definitely don't have enough time to get through all that. All right, so on your chart, I just want you to notice, right, on your chart of all the things that we just read, right? And so, I mean, if you just kind of cross off kind of almost the bottom line, but you can notice as the angel's giving this prophecy, remember, Daniel, 600s, right? We're in the 600 BC range. But you can notice, just look at the dates, right? So you're in that 323, and now you go all the way down to what we just read, verse 20, verse 21. We're in 175. So in this prophecy, Daniel's reading this, and without all these names and me to kind of connect this historical timeline of all these wars, you can imagine what Daniel's thinking. Daniel is been in captivity in Babylon, right? Nebuchadnezzar, the best ever, right? He dies, Belshazzar comes over, he dies, now Persia takes over. He's had the prophecy of these kingdoms coming, and all this is happening, but now this angel, he's getting this vision, this angel is explaining it, and what is it? I mean, literally, your head's like hurting from just reading what we read, right? The north is going to attack the south. The south is going to attack the north. This isn't going to happen. They're trading daughters. They're doing this, right? So all of Daniel sees of this beginning prophecy is war, 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 and literally war for 200 years, right? And in this, Daniel's smart enough, right? He has worked in the top government of Babylon. He is now one of the top officials of Persia. He understands that when people go to war, they don't go to war at their house, right? They don't have war in their neighborhoods. And so you put on a map Egypt, you put in a map Syria, they're going to fight in the middle. What's in the middle? Israel, right? Jerusalem, the temple. Daniel It's not built yet, right? It's already been destroyed, but they know of Jeremiah a couple chapters ago, right? After 70 weeks, they're going to be able to go. They're going to rebuild the temple. He knows that's going to happen. He knows, he's been told that they're going to be released and they are going to rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. But here this angel is telling him, okay, but there's going to be war. South is going north, north is going south. And so in Daniel's mind, okay, we're going to be released. We're going back to rebuild in the middle of a war zone for hundreds of years. And so you have to imagine, when we read last week or the week before, when Daniel's getting this vision, it says that he had been sick, right, for weeks because he knew what this meant, but he didn't know the full understanding. That's what the angel is giving him now, this full understanding. But he's understanding that they're going to get released, they're going to be able to rebuild, but now they're going to rebuild in the middle of literally the World War, in kind of World War kind of land, right? This is this ultimate kind of this place where everybody's going to fight. And so you have to be thinking like Daniel, be like, we're going to be released and we can build a temple and we can start worshiping God and start sacrifices again. But do you really want to do that in a war? And that gives us a new light because it's not just Daniel, right? Daniel's penning this. Daniel is writing this. We know shortly after Daniel is through this book that Israel is starting to know. Remember, all of Israel, all the Jews that are left are in Persia. They're in a very small area together. So as Daniel is seeing this, as Daniel is penning this, he is also teaching. He's also telling the Jews, this is what's going to happen. And then later, Xerxes, this Persian king, says, okay, you guys can go. They're excited to leave slavery and bondage and being held there. But they also, in the back of their mind, know they're going to a world war. I mean, they're going to a place and they're going to rebuild literally the most expensive building on the face of the planet in the middle of a war zone that's going to happen in a couple hundred years. And so, yay, we can do this. Yay, we want to worship God. But once in the back of the mind, this is all going to happen again. You can't have this many wars go through Israel, go through kind of the Palestine area without the temple getting destroyed, Jerusalem getting destroyed. And so you can imagine rebuilding Jerusalem, right? The temple walls, building the neighborhoods, the moat, all the things that we've already read in Daniel. And being, I just in my mind, I always think it's teenagers, right? Young kids. They're building a wall and thinking, what good is building this wall? Things will be knocked down in just, like a couple hundred years. It's so dumb. I mean, you can imagine in the back of their mind, this is prevalent. And so this is what's driven Daniel to feel sick, right? To be in that kind of state where he couldn't move, to be in the state where he couldn't talk. And it was always taking the angel to restore him and to bring him to health so they could even get through the explanation of this vision, right? So kind of gives us a new idea, maybe a new look at what Daniel is going through, but also what the faithful Jews that are leaving, they know what they're going to, right? They know that we need to go to Jerusalem. We need to build the temple. We need to worship God. But the world's going to be against us. We're going against war. Sound familiar, right? We need to go to church. We need to read the Bible. We need to stand up for our rights. We need to do this. But man, the world's going to take us backwards, right? They knew it was going to get destroyed. They knew it was all going to be a waste of time at the end of this. But it was the right thing to do. It's the thing that God wanted to do. So they left Persia and they go and rebuild, knowing of their ultimate future, that they're going to be destroyed and wiped out in all these wars. And so kind of just gives us something to think about, that, we're called to do the right thing, even though the world is against us. The right thing is still the right thing, right? Let's pray. Father, we thank you.